Hi, guys. I'm back. It's the daytime. It's the day after the previous video on free speech, and it's the daytime. Um, I don't know how long I'll be able to make this video because I'm sort of in the middle of a little girl's birthday party. So if I have to abbreviate, then there'll be a part three, I guess. So yesterday we were talking about um, some of my experiences this in this day and age with free speech and today so that was my experiences, and today I want to talk about different approaches, like different ways you can respond to the censorious uh, atmosphere. And I also want to talk a little bit about why things are this way, why we are this way. Well, we are this way because we're human beings and we don't like to be disagreed with. But I wanted to talk about the aspects of the modern situation that makes this so, especially. So I'll try to be as quick as I can. I was just thinking yesterday when I gave one of the examples about the AST, the Atlantic School of Theology in Nova Scotia. I forgot to mention that. Well, the whole point of it was that I wasn't. It wasn't just being sort of raked over the coals by the president or whomever he was, whatever his official title was. But I was actually denied further employment there because of my outspokenness. So I was given the chance to teach a course there, and it went very well. Seemed to be well received, and the students liked it. And then I applied for a professorship there, and I was definitely rejected, and definitely rejected because of that reason, that I was too outspoken, that and the ways they phrase these things are always very interesting. So in a theological setting like that, you always talk about people always talk about where people are at, and being gentle and kind and all that stuff. So, I mean, is that the mission of a university, to be gentle and kind? I don't think so. It's not the mission of a university to be heartless and cruel either, but it's to teach knowledge. And if that's not the primary thing, then it's not a university. It's something else. It's a daycare center or something. Anyway, I'm not a hard ass though. I'm a really gentle guy. But I'm not spineless. So there you go. Okay, so I talked yesterday about things that I've had to do. Like I was talking about Facebook and Twitter and so on, and how you can't really share your views on those areas. And it's interesting that the reason why today so many people are unaware of the length and depth of censorship and of what's called cancel culture is that you can't notice somebody who's been silenced. Okay, so you notice somebody like Donald Trump, and he's been kicked off Twitter and Facebook and everything, but you don't notice the hundreds and thousands of people who were silenced. I'm thinking, for instance, of Gavin McInnes. He's one of the most interesting and funny uh, people in the political world these days. He's he's been silenced very much, and I mean he has his own YouTube channel. Sorry, he has his own website. Of course, you can still have your own website, but he's been shut off of YouTube and so on. And he was extremely popular. So the thing is, people say, well, cancel culture is not a big deal because nobody's being canceled. Well, yes, they are. And once they're canceled, you can't see that they're gone, right? You don't think of people who are gone. Okay, so bear that in mind. Um, we're not thinking about the people who are gone. You can't hear someone who's silent. So anyway, um, now how to speak. Well, your first option is don't speak at all. And I know a lot of people, for instance, who don't have Facebook, who don't have Twitter, who don't have Instagram, who don't have anything, and they do that. I think generally out of sense of self-preservation. These are people who have careers, and they don't want to put themselves out there, um, and that's their choice. That's their thing. I think it's unfortunate. I think everyone has a right to speak, and I don't think people. I don't think it's right. Okay, so I'm not going to say that a million times, that it's not right to silence people, and that people should have people should have the ability to be different, right, and express themselves. So that's one way. Don't speak at all. Sorry, there's a garbage truck going by or something. Um, Second option is stick to safe topics. Okay, and this is kind of what I've done in the last couple of years. And it's a process that you have to. Someone like me who loves to get into the nitty gritties. As I said yesterday, you have to exercise a lot of self discipline. You can't, you've got to. It's you got to develop a habit of keeping your mouth shut. Okay, so my my approach is now to deal with safe topics. I primarily do book reviews. If somebody wants to debate whether a book is good or not, that's seems to be, a fairly safe thing. You could get into more controversial things, like, for instance, my most watched video is a book review I did on Islamic history, and I don't say anything about Islam in it. I don't say anything negative or pejorative, as far as I'm aware. But it's just an interesting topic. Um, I've done sort of sneaky things too, in a way. I've talked about sex and marriage and stuff like that by looking at different romance novels. Again, my favorite is The Sorrows of Young Werther, and I talked about stuff like that. Now, I'm reading a wonderful book right now. I have it with me. I've been working on this for a while, and I finally got back into it again. Um, Emile Zola's The Masterpiece. Now, this is the first Zola I've ever read. The original French title for the masterpiece is L'œuvre. So L'œuvre just means work. So this is obviously it's probably a decent translation of a title, masterpiece. But it's for instance, it's beautiful. I'm only about halfway through, I guess, and it's a beautiful, yeah, halfway through. It's a beautiful. Well, it talks about painting and art, the art scene, and all that stuff. But there's a beautiful love story in it too. And for instance, a section I was reading yesterday was the protagonist. Um, he finally sleeps with the object of his desire, and a point is made that she's a virgin, and he's sort of a virgin or whatever. And so discussing the masterpiece then can give you a chance to discuss some of your thoughts on sexuality. Um, and it's really good in the sense that literature is an awesome avenue for this stuff, because with too often, discourse is channeled through narrow, unfruitful avenues, because the scope is too limited. Whereas if you, for instance, if you deal with a classic, then all of a sudden you're transported back in time and to another time and place, and you open yourself up suddenly to um, the discussion of perspectives, and that everything can't be narrowly and easily fit into the modern mainstream media narrative. Um, Zola is dead, and he's immune he's out of the reach of all these people. So Zola was born in 1840, and his looks like this book here was written in 66, it looks like 66, blah blah blah. So he's writing in the 60s, 1860s and 70s, it looks like, and in Paris, France. Different time, different place, and literature it does something to undermine censorship, in that it exposes. And the worst thing about politics is that it's narrowly focused. So you'll notice, for instance, in the modern and the contemporary controversy about racism, well, the people who talk about racism have never been anywhere in the world outside of usually the United States. And so when they talk about racism, they exclusively talk about white domination, and half of the world's people are Asians. Okay, so they have, it's almost like ridiculously naive to talk about racism when you're talking about what less than a quarter of the world is white, and you have no ability to talk about the reality of racism outside of the narrow window of the United States or Canada, whatever. And the reality is that, is there racism in China? Is there racism in Japan? Is there racism in Africa? Yeah, of course there is. So this idea about white supremacy and so on is so silly that it's ludicrous. And I've read lots of great novels from Africa. I took a course on African history, and the professor used lots of uh, literature, lots of novels from written in Africa. I've read lots of literature from every time and place, and what 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 the narrow ideologues don't want you to do is to be able to see anything but the world as they present it to you. So they'll say that, well, in this world, white people are are all powerful, they have all the money and all that stuff, and all the racism is exercised by white people against black people or brown people or whatever. Well, that's just simply not true. So the great thing about literature is that it can reshuffle the deck. Okay, so if you want to talk about Zola, you're not talking about 21st century United States, you're talking about late 19th century France. Okay, um, so there you go. So that's just sort of a discussion of um, my approach now is kind of I deal with safe topics and I'm a little bit more clever. So in the and it makes me think, when I talk about this, it makes me think of the literature, the Enlightenment era, and the things that people like Voltaire and Rousseau and all these people who are subject to censorship, what they had to do to contend with censorship. So, for instance, Voltaire was a Frenchman, but he couldn't live in France. He basically had to live in Switzerland, and he basically smuggled his books back into France. And for as influential as he was, as wealthy and successful as he was, he could have, he was arrested at one point. He was put in the Bastille at one point, um, and he could have been very easily killed. So he had to move. He had to live in Switzerland. He spent, as you know, he spent some time living with Frederick the Great in Prussia. So one thing that Voltaire was good at was being able to attack things cleverly. So you wouldn't say, "Oh, the King of France is terrible, monarchy is terrible." You would go about it in a more elliptical manner. Like, for instance, uh, Voltaire made he was a critic of Christianity, although apparently kind of a believer himself in a way. the way he went about it more cleverly than you'd think. And he, for instance, he wrote a famous play about Muhammad, and so did Goethe, mind you. And that was a way to talk about religion and to make criticisms about religion, but make it look like but make it hard to prove, so to speak. And so this is something I've done in my new novel, Go Out From Us, which, as I should say again, is now out on Amazon for purchase or download via Kindle. I wanted to talk about issues that were important to me, issues of sexuality, issues of masculinity, femininity, um, issues of education, personal development, the government, all this stuff. But I did it in setting a context, almost an allegorical context. And that's for instance, that's one thing that great writers like St. Thomas More in his book Utopia did. Um, Dante, for instance, made a lot of political jabs in his Divine Comedy. So sometimes you can be clever. And Diderot, going back to Enlightenment France, 17th century France, 18th century France, Denis Diderot, he wrote a lot of stuff, a lot of criticism, a lot of content, disguised at critiquing his own world, the religious supremacy of the church, the Catholic Church, and the legal supremacy of the king, by writing fiction. And other great Russian novelists have done the same. And Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, they had to deal with a lot of censorship under the Tsar. And of course, it is intensified and became even more dangerous under the Soviet regime. So people like Gorky and Solzhenitsyn and so on had to be quite clever. Now you have to be clever even now. Look at something like the old thing that they say is the example of Mark Twain, right? Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, using the N-word. And am I censoring myself by saying the N-word? Yeah, I suppose, but I don't like the word. I don't like that word. I think it's rude. I don't like rude words. So I don't say the F word in front of people if I can help it. Don't swear in front of people. I would never take Jesus' name in vain. I wouldn't take Mohammed's name in vain. Not because I like Mohammed or whatever, just because I'm not rude, right? So I don't say the N-word because it's rude. But is it possible? Is it good? Is it necessary to have the N-word in Tom Sawyer? I think it is good and necessary and important to keep it as it was, right? It's a book. Books are harmless, right? The harm that books do is what you bring to them. It's not what you take out of them, okay? So that's important. So basically what I'm talking about here is the approach of the indirect or the esoteric. You can say a great deal by and get people to think by being not so blatant about it, not so blatant about what you're trying to say. And science fiction's has always been a very great avenue for thoughtful discussion about important and controversial topics. You can think about stuff like Star Trek, for instance, was always a leader in that way, in bringing up difficult and controversial topics in a thoughtful way. So that's something important. Another approach is anonymity. Some people on YouTube, Twitter, whatever, conceal their identity, and this is something that some of the people I watch on YouTube who are into the men's rights domain, they call the manosphere or MGTOW or whatever. Some of them conceal their identity, and that's because they don't want to get fired. Okay, so we know, for instance, that you're able to say, for instance, white people, white people are terrible, white people are evil. I dream of a world without white people. And you can say, things like kill all men, but you can't say the opposite. You can't say black people are evil. I dream of a world without black people, or I dream of, or women are all evil. Women should be whatever. So the people in MGTOW, a lot of them have required to conceal their identity, and they use avatars and never share their email or their face or anything like that. And that's another avenue. That's one way to go about it. And then another way is what I call the all guns blazing way. And some people have done this. I can think of a few. Again, I mentioned a few minutes ago, what's his name? Gavin McInnes. He's always been all guns blazing, and he's built up a lot of wealth, um, a lot of fame because of that. He's a man who he doesn't kowtow and he doesn't cower, but he's also suffered a lot because of it. Um, so love him or hate him, you have to respect Gavin McInnes for having the courage of his convictions. And Steven Crowder would be another good example. And I'm thinking, of course, of the frogs are gay guy. What's his name? You know who I mean. I can't think of him right now. But be careful here, because a lot of people who say they're brave are not brave. They're not brave because they toe the party line. And, and that is not courageous. Courageous is to disagree with the mob and suffer the consequences. It's not to try to harness the leadership of the mob. People like AOC, who try to harness the power of the mob. AOC is not courageous. She's not wise. She's not a woman of integrity. Nancy Pelosi. I was trying to remember her name yesterday. She's a demagogue. And it's terrible. So the all guns blazing, I'm talking about people who actually are going against the party line, who are going against what's politically correct. Okay, so first you have to figure out who those people are. So someone like Gavin McInnes would be a great example, or Steven Crowder, or Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has managed to, survive and profit from the all guns blazing approach. Not that it's been easy for him. Now the final approach, I've listed actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth and final approach is how do we speak today, is belief in the system. Belief in the system incorporates a couple of the other approaches. You can be all guns blazing, and it's easier if you believe in the system. Now, by belief in the system, I mean you believe that in the end, people are good, people believe in freedom, people believe in treating others well, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and that the legal system, our great legal system, will protect you in the end. I don't believe in that, but I suppose it's good that some people do. I don't believe in the system. I don't believe that in the end, despite all the powers of censorship, that in the end, good people will be free and that only the evil are silenced. I don't believe in that, but that's an approach that some people follow. I don't know. Does Jordan Peterson believe in the system? Is that why he testified in Parliament against compelled speech? Gad Saad? Does Gad Saad believe in the system? Gad Saad is another of these dark web guys. He's a professor in McGill, I think, and he's an evolutionary guy. They're all these evolutionary people, aren't they? Um, so that's another approach. Do they believe in the system? I'm not sure if they do or not. I grew up believing in the system. I grew up in believing in the democratic values that the West espoused. See, I grew up during the Cold War, where the bad guys were the people who censored. The bad guys were the communists. But now that that's gone, the bad guys are the free speech people. So it's a different world. It's a different world now because we don't have the Red Scare. Apparently we beat the Reds, but in a way we didn't beat the Reds, because now I'm making a video on free speech. Can you imagine? So now let me jump to talk about my last topic. Why censorship now? As I said yesterday and earlier in this video, censorship is just what human beings do. It began it's as old as civilization. It began with people holding unpopular views about the gods, for instance. I guess, did the writer of the Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh have unpopular views? I doubt it, because otherwise they wouldn't have survived. We know that Socrates was murdered because he taught things that the powerful didn't agree with. And lots of other people, like lots of Christians, were martyred. Lots of philosophers were killed, sometimes by Christians. And all through history, people have been murdered for holding unpopular beliefs. Some have been persecuted. Some have been fined. Some have been jailed. So what's different now? What's different now is the internet. The internet makes everything different. So as I said yesterday, a person can be on the internet who has no education and is put on a par with someone who does have education. So back in the old days, the only people that got in print, for instance, were people who went through peer review processes. To get a university degree, still, like for instance, a doctorate, you have to a doctoral board has to say, yeah, you're good enough to be awarded a doctorate. And in academic journals, you're not going to be published in a respectable academic journal, whether that's Patristics or the Journal of the New England Journal of Medicine or whatever, unless experts in your field say that your study or your research you're writing is good enough. But the internet's not like that. Anyone can get on the internet and people can say all sorts of things. So the internet's new. It provides new opportunities, but also new dangers. And it's created an opportunity for the unwise, the unscrupulous, and the uneducated, but it's also created an opportunity for the wise, the educated, and the morally upright. So another thing is that education is very poor in our culture today. Education is very bad. I talked about this yesterday in one of my examples of being censored or being persecuted for things I've said and done. Education is very poor. Back in the day, people were expected. Children were taught a lot more, and they weren't kicked ahead from grade to grade. It wasn't compelled. Lots of schools, you're not allowed to fail people. You're not allowed to hold people back. And in lots of places, basically, you get your high school diploma just because you're 18 or 16 or 17. And today you get your university diploma because you paid your tuition, right? So education is very poor today, unfortunately. Let me just give the example. People always say, why do I even need calculus? You don't need calculus. You don't need calculus. You don't need to learn how to read Latin. conjugate Greek verbs. You don't need any of these things. But these things teach you how to think. These things are like muscle builders for your brain. So whether it's Aristotelian logic you're studying, you're learning Klingon, you're learning Latin, or you're learning calculus, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're being taught something complicated that's going to stretch your brain and teach you how to think. Teach you how to think and teach you how to learn. So today education is very poor in that regard. Dechristianization. So we're talking about why censorship now. Let me just back up and just string my final point there. Censorship is the natural product of bad education. Why? Because if people don't believe that there is such a thing as education, good education, being educated, having attained education, then there's no belief that there are some people who get to speak because they have learned, and those who don't know yet should, in a way, defer to them. So, in other words, censorship is the only tool that the uneducated have to deal with the educated. And people who have been denied a good education have no choice but to censor others who are better educated than them. Censorship is a natural reaction, isn't it? Okay, so dechristianization. Believe it or not, dechristianization works very strongly against an intellectual culture. And what I mean by that, I'm not saying that as a Christian. I'm not one. What I'm saying is I know Christianity, and Christianity believes in an objective moral order, but also in this case, an objective rational order. Okay? So that there's such a thing as objective truth. Today we have to contrast that with Marxism, modernism or postmodernism, and the different forms of Marxism, of course. Feminism is a form of Marxism. Critical race theory is a form of Marxism. So these things are about power, not about attaining a similitude between observer and object. So, like, for instance, the great Christian theologian St. Thomas Aquinas said that knowledge is about arriving at an adequacy between object and subject. So the person who beholds the object, that their idea of the object corresponds to the object. Whereas in our modern world, in a critical Marxist perspective, objectivity doesn't matter because they undermine the importance of the object by focusing on the motivations of the subject. So it's not whether the house is yellow or not that's important. It is the person who says the house is yellow. What's his perspective? Is he white? Is he racist? Is he wealthy? So that's another reason why we censor, because people say that there is no objective truth. There's only the power someone is trying to impose upon another person under the guise of truth. Okay, so I only say that a house is yellow because my concept of house is racist, is colonial, is whatever. It's the wealthy controlling the poor by telling them they don't have houses or something. So I don't want to make this silly, and it's not easy to grasp the Marxist critique, but it's about power, not about the objective truth. Okay, so this is the same thing with feminism. Is just, as I said, it's just a version of Marxism that focuses on women, and critical race theory is just a version of Marxism that focuses on skin color. But it's all Marxism. Okay, I think one last thing I want to talk about is in terms of why censorship now is a lack of war. Okay, let me connect the dots for you. Through most of human history, respect was something that was intimately tied to consequences, and one of the biggest consequences is the threat of violence. Okay, so in this day and age, by means of the internet, for instance, by means of Western freedoms, by the power of the Pentagon and the American military, weak people are able to act with impunity. So the weak, the uneducated, the bigoted are able to speak on the internet and turn to censorship because they have the physical freedom to do so. Um, in a world that depends on war and consequences um, of physical realities, then um, you speak more respectfully, more hesitatingly. You're more inclined to you're more inclined um, to measure your words because of the respect that you feel for other people. In today's circumstance, there's there's little hesitance to speak respectfully to another because there's no fear of physical reprisal. Okay, so the weak and the uneducated don't need to fall back on credentials of strength and education. Um, but through most of human history, the fact was that the consequences of the consequences of your conduct could be physical. Okay, they could result uh, in physical reprisals. Thanks to the American government, um, people can say what they want to say and not fear consequences. The mob feels no consequences because the mob is protected by the American military. So, again, that's a little bit of to connect the dots. There is a little bit more difficult, but this is part of the thing. And in a way, I want to say that the new culture, the culture of the young, the culture of the internet, is not a culture that was built up on the Western tradition of having to fight for your freedoms, having to fight for the right to speak by means of hard work. The people that in previous generations, like my grandparents' generations, literally had to for their right, fight for their freedoms to speak. But the younger generation hasn't had to fight for their right to speak, and they have no gratitude for it. They haven't had to fight in the trenches, nor had they had to fight in difficult classroom setting by earning your education through hard work. Okay, so I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say. Um, if I think of some aspects that I failed to mention, I'll certainly could do a follow up video at some point. And if anyone has any thoughts, any questions, please comment on the YouTube here. I'm a pretty safe and forgiving and indulgent kind of guy. Anyway, thanks so much, guys. It's Friday the 13th. I hope you're going crazy and doing stupid stuff. All right, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.